So this is the Athletes to Athletes podcast. I am the host of the Athletes to Athletes podcast, Ryan Holmes, joined by CEO and co-founder Reed Meyer. Reed, let's dig into kind of the foundation of Athletes to Athletes. As being a co-founder, I've heard a bit of the story of post-it notes on a cork board in the dorm room, but kind of give us a little bit of how Athletes to Athletes came to fruition in your mind and is now the company that we have.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. So Athletes to Athletes was founded exactly like you said, on a cork board in a dorm room at the end of my college career. As a former college athlete myself, I played baseball at Texas Tech University and Weatherford Junior College. I realized after my playing career was over that it was cut a little bit short by reasons that I could have avoided had I had a little bit more information, a little more education on how college athletics work, how the recruiting process works, how I could have chosen a school that was a better fit for me, and it sort of ramped up from there. So as I was sort of going through the last semester of my college degree, I was trying to understand, what questions could I have asked myself? Who could I have talked to? What things could I have investigated more during the recruiting process that would have potentially allowed me to stay at whatever school I did decide to commit to for all 4 years or all 3 or 5 years, depending on how long that degree plan goes for. And through doing that, I spoke with other college athletes as well to try and make sure, hey, I want to make sure this isn't just me. Maybe I just had a bad experience and I did it wrong, and that's okay. And from talking to other athletes who went through this same recruiting process, this same college athlete process, it was amazing how much our stories were aligned in the sense of we just felt unprepared. Everything we were doing seemed to be reactive rather than proactive in how we were looking at things. We were talking to coaches who get paid thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to convince you that their school is the best school and maybe hide some of the things that maybe wouldn't be a good fit for you and accentuate the things that would be a good fit. It's impossible to not, as a 16, 17-year-old kid, be wowed by people offering you scholarship money to go and play for their school, or even offer you a spot on a college program because of how prestigious that really is. There's such a low number of people who really get to do that. So through going through that process and sort of kind of getting punched in the mouth a little bit, to be honest with you, we discovered that, there's got to be a better way to help these kids in high school prepare for that next step across the board, academically, athletically, financially, personally, across the board. And so we created this program that helps guide kids through that process a little bit easier. We have former college athletes that talk to you, that mentor you through that process. We advise you on all different aspects holistically, not just on the athletic side. We really try to help kids find that college decision that's going to satisfy them for the next 40 years instead of the next 4. But that has to come from past experiences, educating and empowering from people who have been there, who have done that, who can tell you things to focus on, tell you things to prioritize, help you sort of guide through some of the fat that you notice in this process. And that's really what this came from.
Yeah. I mean, as a former college athlete myself, playing college football, I was lucky enough to have a brother. We were 8.5 years apart. We are 8.5 years apart. But have a brother that went to college before I did and went through that process, the recruiting process. And, I ultimately ended up going to the same school, Wilkes University, that he went to, playing for the same coach. And, I definitely think that it is in part because he went there and because we trusted those people that he had trusted already for 4 years. And we knew so many people in that area. But without that type of guidance, I'm flying blind, right? I'm getting letters for a couple different sports at this point in my career. I have no idea whether it's football or wrestling. I don't know which avenue I would really like to take myself, right? So in having, my brother to guide me and seeing how things panned out with my high school wrestling as well as football career and how my body felt, and, knowing to talk to my peers and say, hey, where's your mind at? How are you feeling athletically? How are you feeling academically? Where do you want to fit in? Do you want to be, I can remember my brother distinctly saying, do you want to be just a number in a classroom, or, do you want to go somewhere where you're not just a number? And, not to say that it's bad going Division I, and, I've gotten a chance to see a number of Division I schools, and obviously there's great things there, but it wasn't for me, right? But I didn't know that as a 17-year-old until I spoke to somebody that had the experience, being my brother. So I was one of the lucky few that had that. There aren't a lot of kids like me that have that. And, I think that's where athletes truly comes into play, is they can give that sort of guidance and that experience, the firsthand experience that you're talking about, of someone who didn't have somebody else that they could just pick up the phone and call, or that lived down the hall from them, like I did with my brother. So, you know, I'm one of those testaments to, I wish athletes was around back then, so that I could have tapped into it. And but like, I'm glad to now be a part of this team that I can impart some sort of wisdom through, content. And that's what's going to be a part of the Athletes podcast. And you and I have spoken a number of times about how we want to truly lift up the community through the content that we produce, and make sure that it does go hand in hand with our goals of lifting up student athletes and helping them with the experiences. So, some of the things that I will be doing specifically with the podcast is our athlete stories series. We've already had a chance to speak with a couple different athletes. We're going to speak to a hell of a lot more that we have on the docket. But what, when you and I spoke and we discussed the athlete story series, what was kind of something that sparked in your mind as to why this was so important to be a series on the Athletes podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, the core of the information, and the core of the information that matters to these high school kids that are making these decisions, comes from those college athletes. When you talk about, coaches get on media trains and they talk about all the great things that are happening. You have admissions counselors whose whole job is to convince you that their school is the best school, and whatever it might be. I equate it to a job or any other sort of work environment, in the sense of, when you go to a glassdoor.com, when you go to an LRT Sports for athletics, when you go to a Rate My Professor, you don't want to hear the opinions of the leadership, because that maybe isn't the whole story. You want to hear it from somebody who's gone through that process, who's been in the trenches, who's lived that life, who's done all of these things, and they can tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's important to have that perspective from somebody who lived that and who is going through the same experience and the same process that you are going to go through as a high school kid. So many times we lift up the voices of coaches, we lift up the voices of leadership, and I think it's really important that we lift up the voices of the college athletes themselves, to give kids a very realistic expectation of what it looks like to be a college athlete, either at that specific program, for that specific sport, or just in general. I think so many times we glorify and glamorize a lot of things that happens as a college athlete, and so many things are fantastic about it, and so many opportunities are fantastic, but there are some real aspects of that existence and of that livelihood that people need to be made aware of before they choose to make that decision. And I think it's important that we give athletes a platform to tell those stories.
Yeah, certainly. And, so far it's been fun listening to former athletes and current athletes. The next one that we have is a current athlete, UT football player. So, it was great to hear his perspective, and I can't wait to get that story out. But another part of this podcast will be literally us digging into some of the most trending topics. We talk about NIL, transfer portal, and not just with the mainstream sports, while it is a good kind of case study for how these things are truly working. Digging into these topics for all levels, right? So, the roundtable series will also be something else where it'll be you, myself, some other people at A2A, sometimes even, bringing in some different coaches and things to discuss some of our trending topics, or topics that we want to dig into as well. So, having a finger on the pulse of sports for us is also very important. And, as somebody who is, working as a consultant like yourself and talking to, different kids and things like that, how important is it for you to make sure that you're paying attention to the landscape of college sports? Not just you could talk to them or talk to me about it on our podcast, but also talk to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's paramount, right? I mean, we're talking about working with these kids, and we have to operate in their reality. When you and I were recruited, there were different aspects. Maybe Twitter wasn't as leveraged. Maybe there weren't as, even after COVID, the video aspect, digital aspect of recruiting has increased dramatically. And so being able to sort of stick with those trends and communicate that information to the kids that we work with is huge. And I think one of the things that we try to really focus on, especially whether it be the roundtable sessions or us working with kids or any type of research that we do, is everything we look at is through the lens of a student athlete. We try to understand how that's going to affect the experience at the recruiting level, at the college athlete lifestyle level, any number of these different things. We want to know how it affects the demographic that we're helping, and we want to find ways to maximize that information to help whoever we're working with. So I think it's going to be really fun to look at all the topical aspects that are going into it. I know just the other day we had a conversation about NIL and took it completely in a different direction than I would have ever expected. We talk about NIL being awesome from the standpoint of a progressive opportunity for kids to make money on their name, image, and likeness, which we all completely agree on. But the way that they've gone about implementing NIL creates actually a harder life experience for student athletes in college. And I would have never thought about that unless we looked at it through the lens of, okay, if you're 19, 20 years old and you're going to school, how does this affect your daily life? And that's been really fun. And I think it's going to be fun to explore that and all the different topics we come up with.
Certainly. And I'm lucky enough to not have social media be a part of my recruiting process. Twitter didn't even exist, when I was a college freshman, going to be a college freshman, right? Facebook was, you needed I believe it was a college email in order to even be on Facebook back then. So it didn't, your parents and your grandparents didn't, even your friends you went to high school with that didn't go to college were not on Facebook. It was literally just your friends that went to college. It was nothing but a college atmosphere. Now it is completely different. Now social media comes into play. Now NIL comes into play, transfer portal. It is literally a completely different world when it comes to college sports, high school sports, and it's happening immediately. If somebody wrestles a match in Wyoming, every single person knows what the score of that match is with, just the tap of an app now. So it's completely different, where all of technology is coming into play within sports, and, some for the good, some for the bad. We're going to make sure that we're discussing all of it on the podcast so that we're digging into literally everything. But, like you said, I can't wait to dig into more of these topics. It's going to be a really, really good time. Hopefully everybody tunes in from week to week for our roundtables, for our athlete stories, and for just our one-off topics where we're just discussing basically anything that we really feel like talking about. But, if there is a trending topic that people want to hear about, certainly make sure you guys hit us up on social media. All of our handles are in the comments below, and, we'll be attentive to basically anything. So hit us up, like I said, add us on Twitter, hit our DMs on Facebook. No matter what it is, we will definitely be paying attention to it. And hopefully you guys enjoy the Athletes podcast.